Prometheus had a lot of potential. It's a fun watch, despite its many flaws. There's some cool cast, interesting characters. A lot of it's very memorable, a lot of it's very forgettable, but there was something about Prometheus that was like special and makes me keep coming back to it over and over again. And every time I do, I'm frustrated. So we thought it'd be a fun exercise to see what it would be like to try to fix Prometheus. Similar to what we did with The Dark Knight Rises, using this as a framework to investigate what are the tools writers can use to optimize for certain storylines. What happens if you put this character forward? What happens if you give characters motivations that make sense? Things like that are kind of what we want to push and pull and tease out here. So, like last time, we have a mirror board of our character cast here of just some of the characters. I mean, these are the ones that speak, but there are a lot of characters, and we're going to get to that. And we just want to dive into some of the core problems in Prometheus and see what different avenues we could take to try to fix them and see what we learn in the process. So at a high level, we've identified a couple core things that we want to fix. First of all, the theme. What is this movie about? It thinks it's about a lot of things, and there are a lot of things in here to be about. Which one is it? None of them. We'll talk about that. Character motivations. Competence porn is very popular right now as a new genre. This is like incompetence porn. Why? Yeah. Why are the characters like this? Why do they do what they do? We're going to dive into that. And then the other big one that I was kind of fascinated by is like genre. What genre is this movie? It wants to be horror sometimes. It wants to be action movie sometimes. It has this big cast, which is great for an action movie, but it has these scary moments where you want a smaller cast and more intimate things. It's kind of, it's sci-fi obviously, but is it wrestling with sci-fi questions? Anyway, what genre and what lane there do you want to pick movie is one of the things I want to get into. And then there's some other smaller things we've talked about, like rules. What are the rules? How does any of this work? And then also, why are there so many monsters? I think there are too many monsters. We might need to reduce the number of monsters. But
I want to point out a thing real quick, which is I re-listened to our original Prometheus episode in preparation for this, and I was kind of obsessing over the idea of ideas to time, like that ratio. That Prometheus is 2 hours and 4 minutes, but it feels like it's a trilogy worth of ideas or a miniseries worth of ideas or something. It's really interesting that since we recorded that episode, we've now had Alien Romulus, which is a movie-length movie that basically just has like one general idea and then like a little surprise at the end, which is kind of the Alien movie formula of like, here's the familiar stuff in a different way, and then like ooga booga this thing at the end, right? And Alien Earth, which is a whole bunch of new ideas and has 10 hours to flesh them out and actually spend time with them. So I think it's interesting that we kind of got examples of what either end of that could look like since we recorded our original episode.
Yeah. And I think so as references, I think Alien Romulus is one I'm going to be thinking about because I think it solved a lot of the problems that Prometheus was struggling with. And then obviously the original Alien and Aliens. Those are some of the anchors I'm going to be using as we're talking about all of this. But so as always, got to start with theme. What is this movie about? Trisha, I hand it to you as theme master.
Thank you. I've been thinking a lot about this, and in our original episode on Prometheus, I was discussing how this movie on the surface seems to like be pushing theme in your face. Like there are all of these signals and signifiers of theme. People are talking about thematic ideas in dialogue. There are so many of them, and there are too many of them, and they're not really rooted in character is the main thing that I kind of identified as being the problem. So I kind of just started there where I was like, let's look at what's embedded in the dramatic situation, if you will, and let's kind of think about what themes are naturally sort of most prominent in there, and then the characters that can be brought into this world. And so I think it's really interesting, this conversation about faith, that they seem, for some reason, really to feel that Shaw
Dead
needs
set
to
on.
have,
Mhm.
right? I mean, it's the future. She's a scientist. Why would she be wearing a Christian cross? I don't know, but let's just roll with she has faith, okay? I think it is really interesting that early on we see that she is an anthropologist, essentially, right? Her dad is an anthropologist. We see this situation where they're in the jungle with some remote tribe, and they're kind of talking about faith and anthropology, with the idea being, presumably, although the movie spends almost no time on it, that Holloway is like the science argument of this, right? He's essentially the archaeologist, I think, and she is the anthropologist, right? And somehow they've teamed up, and they could represent two sides of this debate. And then there's this
Plus the
other
other two characters who represent science and science, but Mohawk.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
I'm spoiler alert for what I'm about to say. I am not about to touch Janik, Fifields, Milburn, any of those guys at all. Vickers. I'm not
The
really
supporting
touching any of them.
What
In
about
sort of like my high level, Ford, whoever that is. Like I'm not I'm not
Chance?
touching.
Yeah. I'm kind of a Ravel, I think. Don't you guys think?
Okay. Everybody, yes, literally everybody other than on the top row here is not someone I'm about to talk about. So anyway, but the other theme that the movie seems really interested in, and I'm going to take it at its word that it wants to be about that, is immortality and like humans and gods, essentially. And the really interesting intersection of these ideas to me comes sort of in this examination of what a soul is. And I don't know if anybody says the word soul in this movie. I don't think they do, or do they?
Wayland says in his exposition hologram thing, he's like, "Hey,
Yeah.
everybody, David's here. He's the closest thing I'll ever have to being my son. Also, I want you to know that he doesn't have a
Yeah.
soul because he's a robot." And it's like, okay, that's a weird
And then you
dig to
cut
put
to a
in this.
Fassbender
Right.
face.
Right. With
Yeah.
like a
It's like a dig from the grave for no
Right.
reason.
Anyway, so they
yeah.
say it then.
I guess it's only a dig if you care if you have a soul, which I'm going to come back to also. Anyway, but I thought let's just say that the mission is what it is. We're going to go looking for this alien race. We think that they might be our creators for some reason. And Wayland is going to fund this mission because he cares about immortality. So my thought was, why not construct the characters then to really be about the debate, the thematic debate here? So my thought about Shaw is to basically keep her backstory the same. She's an anthropologist. But because of that, she tends to believe that there's something good in humanity, that humans are flawed, but they're fundamentally capable of love, grace, sacrifice, redemption. In other words, we are more than the sum of survival instincts. We are more than like what nature kind of, might otherwise have made us to be. Something beyond like what normal evolutionary instincts would have done. That's to her what a soul is, right? Like the idea that we're made in the image of God, if you will, and whatever that goodness is, that is what the soul is. And then I thought to make Holloway a character by giving him a point of view. And so my thought was, then have Holloway be totally the opposite of this, right? He's the archaeologist, so what he believes is based on the record of human civilization, which to him is all war, right? It's all war, it's all death, violence, tribalism. Humans basically are only survival instincts. They will absolutely stab each other in the back and kill each other. They're willing to annihilate the entire human race and the entire planet for their own survival. It's just biology. It's just reproduction. It's just survival. There is no soul. And this can still, they can still have a romantic relationship. I think that, people who are interested in these sort of big questions often do end up together. So I have no problem necessarily with that. Then the intersection of this sort of faith, science, are humans good, are humans bad, comes together with Wayland in his quest for immortality. He's not so much interested in like human nature, are we good, are we bad, but the thing that a soul promises to him, which is immortality. And I think it's interesting he's made David, because like humans created machines, machines have now conquered nature, and humans can conquer death, basically. It's just like an engineering problem. We can solve this. We've already made an android. An android essentially is a human being without a soul, but that is immortal, right? And I think that's all super interesting.
And I think that does, like, around all of this, the theme of, like, creation and the ability to create is also
100%.
very heavy in here. And I think that's where a lot of what David brings to this could plug into.
Right.
I'll interject real quickly. Also,
please.
Just destruction. I think, like, what do we destroy in order to create? Right. We open up with the engineer destroying itself to create life. We end with an engineer being destroyed to give birth to this ultramorph or whatever the hell this movie is. And along the way, we have someone who can't give life and then is able to, but wants to destroy the thing. Right. David is made and has his maker, but then he also will destroy things in his way to get what he wants and create. And Covenant goes on to destroy the engineers to create the xenomorph. Like there's a lot of I think question about what we destroy in order to create. But I think to your point, Tricia, that's not being teased out here by the characters and by the conversations that are happening throughout the course of the movie. They're being hinted at in an interesting way, and that's where it stops.
Right. And so then my thought was to make the reveal that what they find on the alien planet to sort of be really thematically resonant. So it does require me tweaking alien lore, I suppose, which is so convoluted as to not matter anyway. So let's make it matter, is my idea. And so my thought was, let's say that sure enough, the engineers are scientists, engineers, if you will, and that they are interested in creating life. But most specifically, they are interested in creating an immortal being. And so their attempts to create the xenomorph are part of this quest to create an immortal being. And I think it's really interesting. The xenomorph itself, what we know about it from alien lore, is that it does kind of have this life cycle, right? Where it spawns, it grows, it is sort of capable of being killed or dying if you blow it out an airlock. But mostly, it actually just kind of regenerates. It's really hard to kill. It in some ways seems like it could have been created as an immortal thing, almost like the immortal jellyfish, I think is what it's called, which is the jellyfish that we have here on Earth that theoretically never dies. It just reaches the end of its life cycle and respawns. And it can be killed by violence, but it has no natural death that scientists know about. And so my thought is, let's say the xenomorph is that, because it kind of is that already. And have the engineers being all about that question as well. And so what they discover essentially on the alien planet is a laboratory with, biological, they're trying to engineer an immortal being. Now, I have all kinds of ideas about what that could look like. But with this construction, you'd basically be able to keep the first act as it is. The second act will need to be dramatically reworked because in my version of it, the aliens, the engineers are not human. They don't even need to look humanoid, right? And I guess you could keep them looking humanoid if you want, but you would totally not even need the whole bit about the head of the engineer and the DNA matches us because they're us or whatever. So in my version, we are not them. We are lab rats. And Earth is basically an experimental biome that they've created in their quest to do all these other biological experiments.
It also raises kind of a bigger question for this brainstorm, which is, where are we trying to push Prometheus as we try to fix it? Because one of the things we talked about in our podcast was, there's a bunch of different types of movies in here. There is almost a standalone movie, which doesn't concern itself with trying to tie too closely to the rest of the Alien franchise. It's almost like a parallel movie existing in the same universe, which maybe has some fun Easter eggs or overlap. Like, these are the space jockey aliens, but we don't have to actually explain how this story leads to xenomorphs. So there's that approach, or there is what you're kind of, I think, pitching there, Tricia, which is we try to push this to be more directly and clearly an alien creation origin story. And I think there's probably good versions of either of those, because there's also a version of this where it is like we are making a movie that is more about this kind of existential question that I feel is the most interesting to me when I watch Prometheus, which is it's almost like kind of just a disturbing nihilistic feeling of trying to understand something. Like you want a story, you want a narrative to explain, why do humans exist? Why do we have a consciousness like we have a consciousness? And, there must be a reason for it. And to go and to find your maker and for it to just be inexplicable, or it hates you and wants to kill you for some reason. Like the idea of meeting your creator and not getting any sort of answer that is satisfying, and it just leaves like a hole or a void where you were hoping for some kind of closure.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a movie that maybe can have the alien stuff in it too. But I think that was when I watch Prometheus, that's where it ends. That's where it ends with Wayland and with Elizabeth Shaw. Kind of like, I still need to figure out. I'm still searching for an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's an interesting movie there, but I'm not sure what the rest of that movie is.
To be clear, I'm not suggesting that like they get into the lab and they immediately see a xenomorph, or you know what I mean? I think you can still really save that that's what's going on for the end. Like, I was trying to basically like high level, what are the engineers actually doing? And then we kind of tease out the mystery of what are the engineers doing and why throughout. So, they get there initially, they probably think it's a civilization. It's not a civilization. Okay, what is it then? And then I had these ideas for like distinctive areas there could be, because right now it's all just like one big pyramid of a bunch of tunnels and none of it makes any sense. So I think you need to make those locales more distinctive. But again, you could like seed the clues along, and then the reveal of the xenomorph could still come at the very end where you're like,
sorry,
it's appropriately freaky.
Dog's cameo.
Yeah.
Well, and so I think I think the clearest takeaway for me is that like the reveal of what the engineers were doing should mean something to the characters.
Correct.
And motivate some new behavior, getting to, again, the character motivations side of things. So whatever that is, and I think, as we've said, problems is there are too many ideas in this movie where it is trying to be like faith versus science, but also like mortality and like meeting your maker and creationism, but also this nihilistic thing of like, you made us and then you killed us, and why? We're not going to tell you, but also you're us, but you look totally different, and we open on you on Earth seeding us, but why? And how does that play with any of the other science that we know about? Anyway, it's like there's all these crowded ideas, but I think none of them are clicking and motivating characters in a meaningful way, and I think that's something we need to zero in on as we move forward. Brian, you have a thought?
I do. Just a couple things to sort of pepper in before we like properly kind of move on to the next little bit here. But one, Tricia, as you were talking about the immortal thing, like, remember Ash, he refers to the xenomorph as the perfect organism in the original movie, right? And we'll get to genre later, but one of the things this movie also is a prequel. And like you said, Alex, it doesn't have to be. It could be a movie that's totally doing its own thing, but it's trying to be a prequel in a lot of ways. And then I think Ridley just got obsessed with too many ideas and just said, yeah, but I want this to be a mystery and I don't want to explain this and da-da-da. So then you end up with this thing that doesn't actually feel like it is doing, sort of like checking the prequel boxes, right? I read John Spaihts' original script, Alien Engineers, in preparation for this. And guess where it's set? LV-426. It's just a prequel. Like, it's just here where it comes from. And you maybe say, oh, that's too easy or that's too boring. I don't know. You're already introducing engineers into this universe. Like, we already are getting complicated here. There's a lot of There's a lot of other ideas. So just saying it's set on LV-426 and at the end we're setting up alien like that. That feels okay to me, right? And yeah, interesting. Lots of differences, even though it's like holistically the same story. But Holloway is actually the religious one. He is
Interesting.
quoting the Bible along the way. So to bring it back to characters, every time they see something, he thinks of a Bible quote that kind of is, he's almost trying to explain, like, this is where the Bible quote came from. People met the engineers and this thing happened, and then someone wrote it down, and that's the thing that we grew up reading or whatever. And he's, doesn't just suddenly become like drunk, angry bro in the, the second half of the story for no reason. It feels like that is who his character is, and that is consistently who his character is throughout. So I just think in general, it's like we're getting away from character and theme here, but it's something I'm thinking about now is the sort of like Andor Rogue One thing of how can we try as hard as possible to make everything feel like it is leading up to the original movie rather than coming up with lots and lots of different stuff that sort of send things in all different directions. So that's kind of something I'm going to think about over this conversation.
Yes, I was percolating on all the things you laid on the table, Trisha, about theme. You got, the kind of faith, the soul talk, the immortality creation. And it made me think, if the engineers are this super advanced species that, have achieved godlike powers and are kind of just playing on a galactic scale now, just seeing what they can create, they're just seeding planets and seeing what happens. It could be an interesting fable of they've gotten this power and they're just, what do you do as a god? You just kind of just keep going further and further and further. And now they're just trying to create, the perfect species, the perfect immortal being. But if there's something lacking in a xenomorph, if there's something about the process to create a xenomorph that is unholy or has gone too far, it is a being without a soul. Like there is something about they've crossed this threshold in order to like achieve their goal that has resulted in this soulless, pure evolution creature that has no other reason for being except for to be like a perfect killing machine survival thing. And if we're talking about like a Holloway or somebody who kind of is voicing this idea throughout the movie, somebody who's saying, this is what life is. Life is just this. There's something interesting there. So yeah, I think there's something about, they created us and they seeded other planets in a way that kind of allowed for beings that have something that feels like a soul. And the xenomorph is like they crossed some Rubicon to create the xenomorphs, and it's of a different type. It's like not of the same type as the other experiments. And maybe it led to their downfall. Maybe it led to the extinction of the engineers themselves because they crossed. And then you could draw another parallel there, which is we've created David. David does not have a soul. He is our version of what the engineers did with the xenomorphs. So I think there's something coming together there that is interesting to me.
Well, exactly. That was exactly my thought, because the alien then becomes an embodiment of one side of the thematic argument, or the thematic argument on one side pushed to an extreme. And I love that. And then with survival as a theme, right? If the soul, quote unquote, is about, are we survival instincts or are we something more? Are we capable of some kind of higher nature? Then the events of the plot that are testing the characters on what they will do to survive becomes a thematic test, right? Like Shaw believes that there is a higher nature. Holloway believes that there isn't. And so that it's only survival instincts, and that everything and everyone will act in its own survival instincts when pushed to that choice. And I actually had this thought that then Holloway's death will end up becoming meaningful. Whether he decides to, like, as in the version now, sacrifice himself, where he's like, please torch me because I'm ill, I guess. But that self-sacrifice becomes a change for him, right? It would be a change in the character, and the plot events could push him to that point.
Right.
Or
A xenomorph or a David wouldn't take that action. That is, there's something uniquely human about that action.
Exactly. And Shaw herself will then become tested by that. Like, you could have a scene where she has a chance to go back to save some of her crew. And will she do that if it could cost her her own life? Or is she actually this higher thing that she believes humans can be? Even Janek's act of self-sacrifice at the end could end up being meaningful if you wanted to keep it. I don't. But like, if you wanted to keep that, it would dovetail in with this thematic debate.
If he was a character that had setup, yeah.
Sure.
Right.
Exactly right.
He likes
So yeah,
Christmas.
I loved this idea of like pushing the characters, like their survival buttons. And I have some thoughts about how it could work with David too, because if David doesn't have a soul, and so everyone's assuming the worst about him, that he is kind of like the alien, then it could be interesting to suggest that maybe he is capable of making a self-sacrificial choice himself. Perhaps Shaw could change his mind. Her action of self-sacrifice could change David's mind about what humans are, about a soul, whether it's worth having, whether it's worth trying to behave that way himself. So yeah, I just think it all makes the whole thing richer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I won't try not to reference John Spade's original script too much. For people who don't know, like, this movie just went through so many scripts,
It was a mess.
drafts with two different screenwriters and Ridley Scott changing his mind and everything. So there's just a bunch of ingredients over many drafts that are here. But it does, David is more sort of like just downright evil in the third act of this original script. And it ends up with him and Shaw. And he's like, I can get you off this planet if you help me. And she's just like, nope, I'm not going to help you. I'm just going to send out a signal. That signal becomes the signal that the Nostromo will later follow. But she's just like clinging to her ideals. She is saying she is like unwilling to budge to help out this thing that she now deems as sort of evil. So it's exactly what you're saying. I'm now picturing, I like my spectrums, right? Of just like, if Shaw is the sort of pure good, pure faith and humanity person who is unwilling to have her faith tested, and then, like, let's say the xenomorph is pure evil essentially, and then someone like David, you could have him in the middle, but you start with that opening scene and the don't have a soul. You're like, oh, actually, maybe he is a little bit more of a good guy, right? And then you move him down the spectrum until he is, where he goes in this movie, more willing to destroy in order to get what he wants, right? And then you have like a Holloway who his faith is tested, so then he goes in that direction too. But then you counteract that with, let's say, Vickers and Janek. Let's almost say like they're one character in this example, the person who is just there for the money and that doesn't really care and whatever, but then by the end is now willing to sacrifice themselves for the good of humanity because they've actually had a character arc in some meaningful way, right? So there is an interesting idea here to look at this level of kind of, like you said, optimism. And this go back to my destruction thing, like, what are you willing to destroy in order to either get what you want or in order to create something? Is like a Wayland or a David, or obviously a like an engineer, I guess, more willing to destroy sort of anything in their path to get what they want, whereas a Shaw is testing against that and saying no, in order to survive, for anything to mean anything, we have to not destroy, and in order to write. So yeah, there's definitely something there that feels like it's coalescing in some way that I'm finding interesting for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think, as we've talked about, a lot of this is in there, right? Shaw's final choice kind of is to, like, no, we gotta stop that ship from leaving at all costs. And so Idris Elba's like, I'm gonna go. You two people that we've seen twice in the movie, you're gonna go down with the ship and you're happy with it. Like, so those choices are in here, and I think that is cool that there are pieces here that can resonate with that. What I like about, so sometimes I like to do frame thematic debates as a literal versus. So, like, as we've been talking about soul, that can be manifest in behavior that is selfless or selfish, like pure survival stuff like we've been talking about. And I think this can plug into genre also, because horror, what's great is that it turns, so horror is basically about death, right? Like living or dying, and the fear of death and mortality and all that stuff. And with horror, you can basically personify death, like make the antagonist death. It is coming for you. That's what the original Alien does in such an amazing way. The xenomorph is going to kill you. You can't run, you can't hide, no one can hear you scream. It's coming for you. And that forces the characters to like make these increasingly, intense decisions. And so I think to continue this thought of like, what is the soul as a thematic debate, moving the movie more squarely into the horror genre would help that.
Yeah.
And so I think
the genre of the franchise already is. So,
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think it's, it's fair that, so to me, this movie feels like it wants to be an action movie and a horror movie and some other stuff along the way. And we made a video, I believe this was the topic of the video, it's been a minute, but like Alien versus Aliens, the sequel, the Cameron sequel thing. And Cameron took Alien, very much a horror movie, and made it Aliens, very much an action movie. In action movies, you are, it's sort of about like literally taking action and doing things is how you win. And so you are well stocked. There's a bunch of Marines, there's guns, like there's enough of people there, red shirts that they can die. And there's a bunch more aliens. So the quantity is just higher. So there's more opportunities for like people to be battling and acting with each other. Horror movies, smaller cast. Normally, I think in Alien, it's like 7 people basically on that crew.
I think 7's right, yeah.
And then Alien Romulus most recently also did that, right? Kind of returning to that Alien roots. In Prometheus, we have 17 people. Like the opening slide is like crew 17, and already it's like no one is going to memorize 17 people in a movie. You just can't do it.
Also, is that 17 minus the surprised crew?
Right.
Right.
They're like 4 dudes that are with Wayland, apparently.
Yeah.
Right. Guy Pearce's manservants.
Right. That also froze themselves or whatever. So I think, just cutting, so in making this more of a horror genre, part of that would be trimming down the cast. And part of that would be doing, I forget which one of you just mentioned, like Meredith Vickers and Yannick, right? Idris Elba and Charlize Theron. Why are both of them in this movie? What is Charlize Theron's like character arc even in this? Like she's surprised the daughter of Wayland. That matters not at all to the plot. Kind of, tangentially connects to creation and all that stuff, but like not in a meaningful way. So I think in moving to horror, you could compress some of these characters to have more clear expressions of the theme, and then what happens to them as they follow their behavior when confronted with death, personified, starts to then create meaning. The people that survive, how they survive, whether it's being selfless, selfish, when does that work, when does it not, is interesting. And then also, just to finish this sort of train of thought, who is our protagonist? Like Shaw is, I think the movie thinks it, like she is, and she is, but David is kind of also right there as a semi-protagonist in some ways. I think like we meet him pretty early also when he's just like on the ship.
Spend a lot of time with him up front. Yeah.
Right. And like we're on, that moment that we've talked about in this briefing scene where his dad says he doesn't have a soul. We cut to a close-up of him and the music goes boom, like so that we feel like, oh, like David feels sad about not having a soul. So like clearly his perspective is something the movie cares about. And I think it'd be interesting to maybe lean into that, especially if we're moving toward this, like, what does a soul mean?
Right. So I agree with you. I love the idea of making Vickers and Janek one character. I think it should not be Wayland's child. Just essentially the captain of the ship who is also a Wayland Corporation stooge. He doesn't need to have a cigar to chew on the entire time. Could even be a woman. It doesn't really matter who that character is. But I think that not having that person be Wayland's child makes Wayland's journey more interesting, because if he really is questing for immortality, he should be desperate, right? He should not have any kind of legacy other than David that he's created. But that's the reason he created David, right? Because he doesn't have any children and he doesn't want to die. He wants to live forever. So he shouldn't have a kid to begin with. Anyway, so there's that. And I would go ahead and eliminate Chance and Ravel also. Bye, guys. Sorry.
The co-pilots, basically.
I mean, you might need to have like one more person sitting in that cockpit who's going to die. That's
I like
fine.
Benedict Long, though. We should, if we can keep him.
If he had a character.
I know.
Yeah, and we'll work on that if we get to it. But then my thoughts really started to focus on David, because he does end up driving a lot of the action of the second act. And I don't mind necessarily having Wayland be aboard the ship and giving him a hidden agenda, right? So my thought was, like I said, to basically keep the first act more or less as it is. You need to seed in the idea that Shaw really wants to have a child, but she's not able to. You need to get that in as early as possible. We need to find out about it longer than 2 minutes.
A weird midpoint to in the middle of talking about you've discovered aliens for the first time. Not I can't. What? Why are we such a
that scene is so wild.
Such a
you've never. How long have you guys been together? You've never talked about it before. Anyway, but seed it in as early as possible. My sort of basic fix of it would be okay, we cut exactly. I'll come back to the opening prologue scene later, because you could totally jettison that scene. Or I think you should make it something different if you're going to keep it. That's fine. We'll come back to that. But then you come into this Iceland dig where they are, and you could easily just have Holloway is doing the digging, right? He's because he's the archaeologist. Let him be the one doing the digging. Shaw is sitting in a tent or a research center somewhere, and she's received an email from a doctor with her fertility test that say, no, you will never, ever, ever have children. And we see that she's processing that. Then she gets the call, hey, come look at this. She runs over there. They find the mural, and the mural needs to be something more than here's figures pointing at stars in the sky. It has to be almost a tree of life type image that would introduce the idea that the engineers are creators in some way, that they are for some reason responsible for life on Earth. Because later in the scene or right after this, where they're doing the briefing on the ship, one of the scientists goes, what makes you think there are creators? And she's like, I just believe they do. You have to have some evidence. What? This is a wild conjecture. Anyway, so have it be on the mural where it looks like the engineers have created life on Earth. And then you could more or less cut to everybody waking up aboard the ship. And you could basically keep the scene with Wayland saying he's the hologram and he's dead now and all of this stuff. That being said, in the second act, you have to neaten up David's plan. And I think the easiest thing to do is have him to discover, they're almost doing this already, have him discover what the engineers were trying to do, and basically have his orders from Wayland be, if they've discovered an immortal being, right? Unlock the secret of that immortality. If their experiments were incomplete, complete their experiments so that I can get that immortality. And so then it will be very clear, the internal logic and internal thread will be very clear. You can reveal it later, but David's actions will make sense, where he, in a version of this that I was working on in my mind, he finds a manual or some kind of instruction, something that only he can read. And he realizes what they were working on. And he's like, oh, the next step is I'm going to take a drop of this black goo and give it to Holloway, and it's going to create the perfect organism that is immortal or whatever. And so then there's a crystal clear logical thread of Wayland told me to do this. I'm doing what Wayland told me to do, which is complete the engineer's experiments for immortality.
Yeah. Yeah, which plugs into the big thing, again, of character motivations. And I know, Alex, this is something that has driven you crazy, so maybe if you want to monologue about this. But that starts to put reasoning behind what David is doing, because as is right now, I don't understand at any point what his thought process is.
Yeah, well, and I think for Wayland too, why do you assume that going to this planet is your key to living forever? And I think you're already pitching some solves, Trisha, which is if all of the archaeological evidence points to these are beings that can create life, that they're gods essentially, and so if they have godlike powers to create life from scratch. Who else would have? They would very likely have technology to help me keep living, as a, Elon Musk. I like him being childless. I think being, I think a more specific character, a certain type of man who has never created life himself, has created artificial life with David, created AI, and is just on like a personal quest, an entirely self-focused quest to like extend his body forever. And so I think if he gets it in his head that these beings are maybe the one thing that we know of in the universe that could have that capability, I have to go to them. And so I think if that was set up much more clearly earlier on, that would be great. And then I think, yes, I love this idea that, and I think it is in there, like we do see David go to, the stasis pod, and it seems like he has some way of receiving orders from Wayland while he's like dreaming or in stasis. And that's interesting. What if we actually were privy to their conversations and we were getting those orders throughout the movie? That this is already in there. And I think exactly to what you guys were saying, if it's clear that the engineers have the capability to create life, they are working on experiments here on this planet, and this black goo is kind of their magical ingredient that they use for creating and destroying, and all it's kind of like their baseline technology for their evolutionary experiments. It would make sense for David to be like, all right, well, I'm going to start testing this on some useful test subjects here on this ship. I have some human beings here. Let's see what happens when I, give it to Holloway or whoever. And so, yeah, but I do think you need the much clearer, we are pretty certain that these aliens can create life, and all of the archaeological evidence is pointing to that. And so it makes sense that Wayland would invest in this trip with some confidence, because otherwise there is just kind of this almost like just Hail Mary, just like, hopefully they can make me live forever. I guess I'll travel across the galaxy to see if that works. It just seems a little crazy.
We've been here for like 12 hours and we don't really know anything about them, but definitely wake me up and I'm going to go talk to them and I'll convince them that I am a being that is worth them making immortal now.
Yeah, the idea of also like wake me up so I can like ask him some questions or talk to him.
Right.
Yeah.
So to kind of like consolidate here a little bit. So I think, so we have this sort of, this goal around immortality, the ability to create life. I think making that very clear from the beginning, not just there's a bunch of like balls on a like cave painting a bunch, like that somehow means it's an invitation to whatever. But like you're saying, Alex, there, it's very clear that we have reason to believe that if we go to this place, we're going to find people that made life. I think it can be a reveal or a twist even that they made us. Like, I think that makes more sense for scientists also to be like shocked by that instead of her. Anyway, evolution is, we tested that a lot. So I think that makes sense. And then I think what we're talking about here with like David is getting into a little bit of my like too many monsters questions, but I think also just like the reveal of information, because we're sort of tossing out different ideas of like, yeah, if we're privy to David's conversations with Wayland, then there's this dramatic irony where we, the audience, know, oh, this is what he's really planning. And that squarely then makes David one of the monsters of like, this is one of the people we need to be afraid of out here on this planet. And right now, it's kind of unclear exactly how we're supposed to feel about David. Like, they clearly want us to not trust him, and he's being a little reckless with people's lives. And so I think he is one of the monsters. But again, it's not clear why he's doing what he's doing. And so therefore it makes him less meaningful, I feel like, as one of the quote unquote monsters.
It also feels like the movie goes out of its way to make Holloway really annoying and just he's an asshole. Like he's really unpleasant, and so you're kind of on David's side when he spikes his drink. So yeah, it's the movie does kind of want it both ways. Like he is, happily keeping a squid baby inside Shaw and getting ready to freeze her to take her home and poison people's drinks, but also the people treat him badly, Vickers treats him badly, and so the movie does want you to kind of be identifying with him, which is interesting. And maybe there is a path there where he is a gray character who is kind of following orders, but also when we see him alone earlier in the movie, maybe we should do something more with that sequence. Like what does he do when he's by himself, and what does it mean? Like, is he kind of endeavoring to be more like a human? Is he kind of a Data from Star Trek kind of a thing, watching movies and kind of wanting to understand what it means to be a human with a soul? Or is he just, truly an empty vessel receiving orders who is just diabolical?
Yeah. What does he want? That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my thought about David, is to give him a character arc, like essentially make him the second protagonist, have him start off being very soulless, sort of robotic, the way that Fassbender's kind of playing it anyway. And he is interested, he's watching the Lawrence of Arabia, and he seems like interested in wanting to like play human, right? He wants to pretend to be human. He seems wounded when Wayland says he doesn't have a soul. And I wonder if we can give him a genuine connection with Shaw, where she can almost tell him, I do believe in a soul. I believe that we're made in the image of God. But if we're made in the image of God and you're made in the image of us, maybe you do have a soul. Like maybe, who's to say? Maybe there is something about you. So she could almost challenge him again in this way of believing that what makes us human is this higher nature that we have. Like, you are programmed to follow your survival instincts, maybe, but you also have choices. And maybe, at the end of the day, you can choose something that would, in a way, give you a soul, right? Like, you could make a higher decision that is, you could be more than the sum of your parts, more than your programming, perhaps. And like I said, my thought was to have him start off as essentially being the villain, and then to have Shaw, her actions and her beliefs, essentially change his mind about what human beings are by the end. So he can almost become like the opposite of a xenomorph, where in some ways he is a perfect being, but he is capable of making the better choice. And my thought with still having him be the one who poisons her, essentially, or like, basically gives the thing to Shaw, to Holloway, that impregnates her, is he could believe he's doing the right thing. He's following Wayland's orders, but also she wants to have a baby, right? Like, I mean, to his logic, like, and I think it could be interesting. Like, I've always thought that her decision, you guys know how much I love that C-section scene. It is one of the best things in movies. It's so freaky. It's so horror, because we're talking about leaning into the horror of this, right? Yeah. So basically, when I was approaching this, I was trying to like fix backwards from how to get to the C-section, and make it really meaningful and have like a real character like choice being made in that scene. But I've always thought that it should take her longer to make the decision to remove the baby, right? Like, it should take her, it should give her pause, that it becomes a moral decision on her part, right? If she believes that, like, she's always wanted to have a baby, as far as she knows, it's kind of Holloway's baby, who is the person that she loves. Yeah, it's not all the way natural, but like, it's a life. So maybe you got to stop and think about it. And then my thought was should really become the crisis of the movie, like, or following that C-section scene should be her crisis of like, I've actually broken what I believed in to save my own life by doing this, right? It becomes that, again, that question of selflessness versus selfishness and survival. I think it could be interesting, but you could also have David basically arguing like, I didn't, basically not being malevolent in his decision or totally cold in his decision to do that. I think could be interesting.
few thoughts really quick. I do think I love the idea of that whole pregnancy thing being more of a thing, or maybe even being a longer part of the movie.
Mhm.
I do think that it needs to not be obviously a squid. And so, but I
Sure.
think if we're removing monsters anyway, I mean, what if the black goo is not just a random monster generator? But if you do give a drop to somebody and they impregnate somebody, it's actually doing something more, I don't know, more subtle. So it's like she is rapidly becoming pregnant with what looks like a humanoid baby thing.
Right.
But maybe there's something off about it, or like it's got black goo influence on it. And like, what is that? Like, what's that going to become inside me? But it's not literally a squid.
Yeah.
I think that there's something much more actually disturbing about that in some ways, of like, I'm legitimately pregnant with a human looking thing inside of me. But like, something's wrong. It's growing way too fast. Something's wrong about it. It kind of harkens more to Alien Romulus and
Exactly.
the monster at the end of Alien Romulus.
We're kind of just making Alien Romulus, is what I'm
Right.
realizing.
Because that's what the black goo does in
That
Alien
movie
Romulus.
has its own problems. I just want to be clear.
Yeah.
Like, that's
Yeah,
not a
yeah.
perfect movie either, but yes.
But it's a good point, because the black goo basically does that in Alien Romulus to her human baby.
Because it's a better idea. They picked up the idea
Yeah.
from this movie and they took it over there.
Well, hold on. Alien Romulus stole it from Alien Resurrection, which already did
Yeah, that's a
the
fair
Alien
point.
baby. But yes,
Yeah,
no one remembers that movie, so it's fine.
And the other thing, as you were speaking, Trisha, the whole idea of soul as well, like there's something interesting about, the movie never kind of actually finding a supernatural explanation of soul, but rather it actually being just kind of like the ability to make choices, or the ability to choose, is almost, if that's how David kind of finds what it means to have a quote unquote soul, is like the ability to choose something that isn't just in line with evolutionary necessity. Whereas, like, once again, a xenomorph is just, it has its evolutionary kind of like imperative, and that's what it does. There are no choices to be made. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there with David too. If he kind of has programming, he's programmed, he gets orders, he has, he's on a track, and yeah, the movie could go either way. It could be, no, AI does not have a soul. There are no choices actually, or it could be the more kind of Hollywood thing where it's like, no, the robot gets to make a choice.
Right. Well, yeah, because as Trisha was talking, like I was thinking the exact opposite is interesting, which is David is, roughly as he is here, which is he doesn't get more evil throughout the course of the movie. We just learn more about his true intentions,
His nature,
right? Like Ash in Alien, right? And then, the opposite with Bishop in Aliens, where he doesn't become a good guy by the end. He doesn't have a character arc. He just always was. It was Ripley's own character arc to sort of believe that he wasn't going to go full Ash on her. But I think the interesting thing, as you were talking, Trisha, is if we have David sort of revealing himself to be more and more, not a great guy throughout this movie, but Shaw is still trying to have faith and still trying to forgive, right? And every time he disappoints her, she is maybe still believing he has a soul. She's still believing that he has hope, and he doesn't change at all. And he is all, whatever. But it's sort of the way that he is then like directly testing her faith. And at the end of the movie, you could have her still decide to travel with him because she is still hoping that he will come around. She's still hoping that there is a soul in there, someone who will change, and not just someone who is following their programming, their nature. That makes David less interesting of a character, maybe, but it helps the thematic. Something to directly test Shaw thematically, I think, is interesting.
Ooh, or I like the final choice of she does decide to take him with her, but it's because she needs him for her survival.
Right.
And she's like, no, this is a survival choice. This is not because you have a soul, my man. Like, it could become
if we're leaning into horror,
for sure.
If we're leaning into horror with the genre, then I don't like a touchy-feely ending. And I do like there's something interesting about, like she starts off being like, you could be a real boy. And by the end, it's like, you are a tool. And I will use you as a tool so I can survive.
And that's great too.
Yeah,
it's
I think
dark.
that's like, to make a spectrum here. Generally, the thing that's sounding the most exciting to me, if I were to do it, is having these kind of crossing character arcs where she does start off more like selfless and like, I believe in a soul and blah, blah, blah. And the events of the plot and why it's a horror movie is revealing like, no, just because you're human doesn't mean you have a soul. Like, you can make dark, terrible, awful, selfish choices. And I think it's then interesting to have the David character going on kind of that reverse arc. And which is sort of also like the reason to have androids in a movie a lot of the time anyway, is to sort of question like, what is the nature of humanity and what makes us human and what doesn't and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like that is just like a basic like framework makes this movie so much more interesting to me, if that's sort of the trajectory. And then we can have these other characters along the way that are, you know, weighing in on different sides and getting pushed and pulled and stuff like that.
Well, and this brings me back to Holloway, because Holloway should represent also like humans are bad. They make bad, selfish decisions and like, you know, they're warlike and evil. And then you could have his death, which, you know, I'm open to ideas about exactly how it goes. But if we're leaning into the horror, it should be something really dark where he is not like, oh, torch me, Vickers, like, you know, I can't be allowed on the ship. It should be the opposite of that, which is like, you have to save my life. Like, he's willing to kill everybody on the ship to save his own life. And so he behaves the most dishonorably and the most horrifying version of humanity. And I think that sequence, whatever it looks like, it can look similar to what it looks now if we like it. I don't love it. But like, if we do wanted to essentially keep it structurally, that should be the midpoint where the death of Holloway becomes this real turn for Shaw, where she's like, oh, I believed better about this person who was my partner.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, he's exactly what he's always said people are deep in his heart.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He was going to kill every single one of us for his own self-interest. And you could really ram that home in terms of the thematic meaning of what happens at that midpoint sequence.
I think, you know, just talking about Holloway as a character for a minute, I think we've explored in our podcast about this movie that he is a really strange scientist character. He comes off like a frat boy, dumb guy, honestly. I don't believe him as the role that he is supposedly filling. And I think there's something much more interesting about a very smart person who conducts themselves in a very civilized, smart way, who's a real academic, you know, who is somebody who you buy early on as like the foremost expert in this field who has found this thing. And that's what, you know, Shaw can be really, you know, attracted to him because of that. Like, he's a really smart, really talented person. But he's also somebody who kind of lacks a moral core. So that kind of intelligence and the allure of that part of him masks this kind of rot underneath. And that rot can be exposed through the events of the movie, where you're now in survival mode and he doesn't have a selfless bone in his body, actually. And there's a horror to realizing that. Whereas like the guy we meet in Prometheus from the beginning doesn't feel like he really cares. Like, I can tell from the beginning he's not a guy I like. And it'd be cool if it was like you're kind of seduced by him at first as being an interesting, super smart, awesome person who then is willing to kill everybody on the ship to save his own skin. I think that's a more interesting character.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it might be interesting kind of pause here and going back to like the Prometheus that exists here, looking at the different characters and why they are the way they are, and why does it make sense? Because I feel like there's like your point, Alex, is basically like Charlie is a bad scientist, and I do not believe that he is a good scientist, and none of his actions like dissuade me otherwise. All of these characters are like here in theory because they're good at something, but none of them are good at any of the things that they're like purportedly here to do. And it's kind of like taking it back to like the genre like thing a little bit. And I think maybe it was in our Alien Romulus episode, Trisha, that you were sort of talking about, like, give everybody a skill, like, make it more clear, like, what is that person good at? What is that person good at? And this movie sort of ostensibly says these people are all like scientists. And
Well,
this guy,
Fifield loves rocks.
he
I know
loves
that about him.
rocks.
Mhm.
Yeah. He's very
And not
emphatic
people.
about that. Right. What a puzzling scene.
Yeah. He has scanning balls that he calls his pups,
His
and
pups.
Sure.
he howls when he releases them,
Yeah.
as
He's a
geologists do.
very well developed character. We just named 3 things about him.
Yeah.
Oh, he has a mohawk. Like, come on. These are all character traits.
It makes me wonder, is like, what should the makeup of this team be?
Right.
Because like the original Alien is interesting, like truck drivers in space, right? They're not equipped for dealing with an alien like outbreak that's, you know, trying to destroy everything. And that sort of the tension of like the wrong people for the job that have interesting other skills that can plug in and like create different dynamics, I think is cool. This movie is like, it's the right people for the job, and yet they're terrible because the movie needs things to go wrong. And so I just wonder what the right kind of makeup of people is, and how do you explain why they're all there if this is Wayland's, you know, if the point of Wayland's journey was to go here and talk to aliens and get immortality, why did he put together a terrible crew? And I think that that's just one of the tensions in this movie is like, I think the Alien franchise wants the truck drivers in space having to deal with something like beyond what they've ever known, you know, or the Marines, we're space Marines, but not like against all these xenomorphs. It's a whole other thing. And this is like, we're scientists on a mission to come here to meet aliens for the first time. And that's what we're doing. But we have to be bad at it because the plot has to happen.
But I think it could be a really interesting, different take on the alien model if they are, you know, Jurassic Park level scientists. You know, Jurassic Park has scientists that are really fun, interesting characters. Ian Malcolm, Ellie Sattler, Alan Grant, like those are not boring characters. We like watching them, but they are not equipped for dinosaurs breaking out. And so I think you can have people expecting one thing, which is like, this is an advanced civilization. We're gonna find them, and they're gonna be like beyond human. We're making contact with like our creators, an advanced species, and we have a crew together like for first contact with aliens like that. And we get here, and they're all gone. We're finding this like laboratory type place with like creepy crawly experiments and creatures. Like, we did not come prepared for that. We came prepared for this like Star Trek thing, and we did not get Star Trek. We got Alien. So I think you could do something interesting there where like everybody's got this optimism about, wow, we're going to meet the Vulcans from Star Trek, and instead we're meeting xenomorphs. And they could be you know, interesting, quirky scientists. Like, they don't have to be boring. Like, you don't have to be a trucker to be interesting. So I don't know. I think they should have embraced the fact that it's a scientific expedition and had actual scientist characters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think, because I'm thinking like, what are the ingredients usually of a crew in an alien movie? And it's like, you usually have like the pure truckers. I'm just here for the money, you know. And then you have usually an android whose, you know, loyalties may be in question. Then you have the corpo, which is Burke in Aliens. Turns out to be Ash in Alien, but that's not revealed until later. The person who's just like, look, we are here to get this specimen and move on, and that's it. And then you have other people who tend to be the more, what we'll call just sort of like everyman, you know, kind of good guy-ish people, like a Ripley, and the other sort of, you know, Ripley and Kane, like the people in Alien who are like, they're just like the people who run the ship, right? And you know, I feel like we have that here, but what we have flavors of those things here. But what we also have room for, as you guys are saying, is if this is a scientific expedition, more than any Alien movie has been, then how do we tease out those characters, their abilities, their skills, but also their beliefs and their interests to go back to faith, right? So if Shaw is purely faith-based and Holloway is more historical, archaeologically based, and their ideals clash, but also they meet in a way where you see why they're together, but also why they have a lot of conflict in their life. And then, Fifield and Milburn, I don't know if we need them to be two characters other than to have two people running around together, but then that's the more science person. I mean, Fifield says, like, I'm just here for the money. I'm not here to make friends or whatever. You could have, they're both scientists, but they have very different takes on the theme and survival and what they're willing to do to help each other out or help themselves out or whatever. And then obviously Wayland and David, their mission about we'll step on anything along the way to get what we want, right? There is a lot of room here to have these characters play these parts to explore the theme. And as you were saying earlier, Michael, then how they die is a direct reaction to, Milburn is too excited to see a creature, so therefore he kills himself. That's actually set up, and it's a payoff when he dies, not just a dumb scientist being an idiot, right? There's lots of room here to actually play with these characters and be like, oh, right. So when I say Chance, you go, oh, right, the pilot who da-da-da, who da-da-da. When I say Ford, you say who? But, the person who, like, because of her medical, and she believes this, and she does this, and she, as Trisha was saying, like, skill, they're able to do this thing that nobody else could do during the cesarean, whatever, right? There's so much room for these characters to be fleshed out. And again, we don't have time to do it. We have too many characters. We have too little time. We have too many ideas in this movie. But it makes me frustrated that this movie feels like it is so well poised to be the movie that actually investigates these different thematic ideals through their professions and who they are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also think having them be competent scientists would just help with plot stuff. So
sure,
but we have so many leaps of logic that are made. There's the time when Janek walks into a room and is like, I am 100% confident that this is a bioweapon that is heading towards Earth to, like, destroy all of humanity. But if you have competent scientists that are, taking samples and understanding, holy crap, like, actually, I now understand what they were doing here in this lab. If there's kind of a revelation sequence that's happening because these are real scientists who are piecing things together. Right now, when this whole group of scientists goes into the structure, they don't really kind of have a thesis or, like, make hypotheses or like debate what anything is. They're just like, this is freaky. I'm out of here. Like, I'm getting out of here, man. And so we don't get that scientific conversation that could also help the audience to stay grounded and, like, what am I looking at here? And the movie as is doesn't seem interested in trying to give you any possible explanations for what you're looking at. But I think in our rewrite here, we would like the movie to kind of be self-contained and make sense within itself. And I think scientists can help do that because that's what they're there for. They're trying to understand.
Yes. This was my exact thought, which is that supporting characters are also supposed to be tools for plot and exposition. And so my thought was to basically keep some of these supporting characters. Fifield, Milburn, and Ford are fine on paper. I like the idea of having a geologist, a biologist, and a medical officer. You would probably have those things on board. And we got to have some people that are going to get killed by the monsters. My thought, though, was that one of the problems we have is in the, like, number of expeditions to the pyramid and the lack of distinct locales inside the pyramid. Because what you actually can do, since you're creating that location whole cloth, you can engineer it to serve your control of information purposes. So my thought was, and they're kind of doing it already. Like, the thing is, everything that I'm suggesting that we do to fix it is, like, almost being done, but then not in any way being done. So like my thought was when they send everybody into the pyramid the first time, you basically have a couple distinct locales where they find the pit of like a pit. Like my version was like a tar pit almost, like where stuff has gotten stuck, or it's almost like a natural well of whatever this stuff is. And they find that, and they find maybe the spaceship area, right? That is going to be that big open room with the seat in the middle. They find that area. And then they find a sealed laboratory area that does not immediately announce itself as a laboratory, but they cannot get in there. As it is now, there is a door. David opens it in 5 seconds. Why is there a door there in the first place if it's going to be easily openable in 5 seconds? Screenwriters. But let's say
I had to cut off the head of the guy.
Okay, we don't need that. That guy's gone. There's no head. None of that's there. Okay, so they find the goo and they find the spaceship. Somewhere probably in the vicinity of the spaceship, they find the manual that I was talking about that David then finds to like understand. He's the only person who can read it. He understands what the engineers were doing in their genetic experiments. My thought with the goo is that they take a sample of it. Again, you don't need the head or the engineers themselves. Just take a sample of the goo and figure out what it is. This is where Milburn, the biologist, comes in, and perhaps Ford, the medical officer. My thought with the goo is to base, and Holloway even, right? He's the archaeologist. They could all be a part of this. My thought is this goes to what we were going to talk about with the rules. But they take a sample of the goo and they essentially do find out what it is, which is that it's this like highly concentrated biological mutative stuff, so that like even a tiny drop of it would create powerful mutations very quickly, like an evolutionary accelerant, essentially. And again, it could be like almost a natural well on this alien planet where it's like, if any life falls in here, it would become something different almost immediately. And so that's why the engineers have set up their lab here, because they're like using it in their experiments to get these like different mutative life forms that they're working on. So I actually like that. They take a sample of it. Maybe Ford takes it back. She's on the expedition too. I think she actually is, right? She helps them take the head back. They take it back to the ship, and Fifield and Milburn get stuck there, but they're by the pit of black goo. This is all very similar to how it would be, except it leaves the mystery of the sealed lab for the second part of the expedition. Then you have something very similar to what happens now, which is that Milburn is so excited to meet some kind of creature, right? Like, let's say, I don't know. Yeah, there's a creature that falls into the black goo. He's excited to meet the creature. Something happens. He falls in there. Fifield won't help him, right? Because Fifield is there for the money. He loves rocks, whatever. Again, you can keep the basic characterizations the same, but Fifield won't help him out of that pit. And as a result, Milburn turns into the monster that's going to like come and get kill Fifield, kill a bunch of people maybe on the ship, or try to get back to the ship, etc. So again, you can keep a lot of the same beats, but if you clarify the rules of what stuff does and clarify the character motivations of why the different characters, supporting characters, are doing X, Y, or Z, then it all becomes a little bit neater. It's basically what's in there now. It just makes more sense.
Mm-hmm.
You just called out rules. And so I think that would be, I'd love to talk about, can we propose rules for the black goo? Because I think there's something that makes sense from what is there on screen that tells me it is this evolutionary accelerant, as you're saying, Trisha. It seems to kind of rapidly take DNA and change it and evolve it and grow things very quickly. And so if that's the case, I don't understand why in some cases, like with Holloway, it just kind of makes him get sick, and also like allows him to impregnate somebody with a squid baby. Whereas, with somebody like Fifield, it makes them into a attack zombie. Maybe that's where Holloway was going to end up eventually. We don't get to see him end up as an attack zombie, so maybe that is the intent. But I think it'd be interesting to really just like, there's a single purpose to this black goo. It takes what it is presented with and it kind of accelerates it. And so if you wanted to create a monster, I mean, would it be something that where like Milburn and another species both go into the black goo pit together, and that's the problem. It mixes their DNA, and out comes a monster. But if you just get a drop of it, you don't become a monster. You're just something evolutionarily accelerating happens in your body, which could be deadly if your body can't handle it or whatever. So I think it'd be interesting if the black goo wasn't just creates squid here, creates zombie here.
Yeah.
But it was very clearly, it takes whatever it touches and like speeds it up and mutates it. And that can be a rule that we can like see clearly repeated and followed. And the accidents happen when things get combined or things happen too fast or people have sex. And I think that's the interesting part.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking also as we're talking about rules, like what does this goo mean? I think as part of like what needs to govern that is like what is the point of that monster?
Why is it in this movie at all?
Right. Why is it in this movie other than we need like bad stuff to happen? And how can it where does the monster come from? I think is a question that we need to like answer. And like right now it comes from incompetence from the scientists because they touch things they shouldn't. And then also David is like maliciously doing things and sort of muddying the meaning of the creation of the monsters.
Yeah.
And so just wanted to put that here too. Is like, what is in a story about like a soul or like creation, etc. Like, what does this monster mean? Why is there black goo? And where do you get a monster in a movie where, in theory, you have competent scientists who, aren't touching things they shouldn't be? Is as I imagine why they needed dumb scientists to do things so that you would have an alien running around.
And like, are we going to lean into? There's already a xenomorph. Like, are we taking this away from a xenomorph origin story? Have the scientists, the engineers, successfully use this black goo to mix and match and create the ultimate species, and that was their downfall? And so in that sealed lab in some part of this pyramid that was buried deep and you're not supposed to get to it, have they tried to seal off the species that they shouldn't have created? And does that get loose? And is that a second half of Act 2 midpoint turn?
I think it's in Act 3.
Or Act 3 maybe, yeah.
Right. Because right now the monster in Act 3 is an awakened engineer, and I don't know if we need that.
No.
Right? If you have a monster in a sealed lab, well, so my thought with the lab was to like basically have all of the evidence of the different types of experiments that have happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then there might be a xenomorph in there in its like stasis or like very early form or whatever. They do let it loose. It does become the monster in the third act. So I feel like, if you get to this place of like, we get through the door we weren't supposed to get through, then the monster's already there, right? You don't have to create that monster. I mean, you could by accident, but like that monster is already there. And I actually, again, I love the payoff of whatever happens with like Shaw and the squid baby and that kind of thing, where she manages to like basically extricate herself from the perfect, like, immortal being's life cycle to save her own life.
And I think what I'm like grasping at is I do like embracing some of the novelty of what Prometheus is going for. And like, there's something kind of fun about the idea of you save the xenomorph as like a third act finale, fun, like end game. Whereas the horror is this more, it's telling the origin story of how you get to a xenomorph by showing the technology that made it, and that technology being applied to other things. And then the reveal is, oh, what if you use the technology and you mix all the most evil things in the galaxy, you make a xenomorph. It's like both a reveal and a fun fan service that you get at the end. It's like, what was the black goo all leading towards? It was leading towards this, but we got to see all these other kind of mishaps with the black goo along the way.
Right. See Alien Engineers, John Spade's script, where the xenomorph grows up and chases Shaw around at the end after the finale of the movie, and it's doing what like Alien did, and you get the alien in the Alien movie. And but yeah, I think that leads back. There is I want to like reverse engineer what the point of this entire movie is really. And for 10 years, I thought, oh yeah, we see the birth of the first xenomorph at the end of the movie, clearly, right? And then it's nope. Did you not see the mural on the wall? That wait,
Yep.
what? So there's this complicated sequence of like where the black goo goes into and who it goes into and how. That's then like at the end that all created this thing. What is that thing? Don't worry about it. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
It'll never come back to this franchise again. Oh, so it's not the thing from the other movie? No, it's not. Okay, fine.
It's like an off-brand xenomorph.
Right. So I mean, philosophically, clearly along the way, Ridley decided that he did not want this to be that. But also, you end this movie with, I think, the final shot of this movie is the birth of this thing, this ultramorph or whatever it is in this final version, which to me is two things. It is the horror movie ending of a movie, the like, oh, we're just getting started. The thing that you thought was dead is actually here. There's more under the floorboards or whatever, like that kind of, ooh, here we go. Wait for the sequel kind of horror movie thing, right? It's also a prequel ending. It's also the thing that prequels do, where they say, and then this is how this thing happened. Oh, calling card. What's his name? He calls himself the Joker. I'll look into it, right? Oh, there's an FBI agent here to see you. What's her name, right? Like those prequel-y kind of goofy things that prequels do. But this movie doesn't really bother to be a horror movie, and it doesn't really bother to be a prequel. But it ends with this, like, here's the payoff of everything. So. Right. I think philosophically, in my mind, number one, the end of if that's how you end your movie, it has to be the first xenomorph. Like, yep. You can do all the other lore you want to do, engineers, black goo. I don't care. If you are doing this as the ending of your movie, that is the first xenomorph. That is the point of this movie. That is what all of this is leading towards, right? So if that's all what this is leaning towards, then what does the black goo mean? That goes back to, are we trying to create an immortal being? Are we trying to create the perfect organism? Is that what the black goo does? Is that why it does what it does to create the xenomorph at the end of this movie? If that's what the black goo does, then reverse engineer that. What does it do when it hits a scientist? What does it do when it hits, an engineer? What is it trying to do? It is sort of built to make something perfect. It is built to make something immortal. You choose something and then you stick with it. Like you said, like you guys were just saying, you can have it do whatever you want as long as you explain it. You can explain it with a few lines of dialogue, where then when it becomes a random monster generator, you go, oh, sure.
It's a random monster generator.
Right. Yeah. Because it's doing X, Y, and Z, right? And then I'll add to that just a quick sub thing, talking about prequel stuff. When you are making a movie in a franchise, you have stuff that's already there, right? So an android who is playing by his own rules and he'll do whatever because corporate. Great. We've seen Aliens. We've seen Alien. We've seen Burke in Aliens. He's not an android, but like he's that guy. We know how that works, right? But then everything else in this movie is like brand new stuff, right? We have engineers, we have black goo, we have the snake monster, which then makes the squid baby, then the black goo makes the squid baby, which then makes the trilobite, which then gives the engineer to make the xenomorph that's not actually the xenomorph. Also, we have the zombie, and it's like you have lore already in this franchise that you could use, and instead you're not bothering to do that at all, almost. And then you're adding all of these new things, right? And you can almost get away with the black goo being random monster generator as long as it feels like it is all building towards that final shot of this is the first xenomorph and this is how we get there along the way. But as it is, it just feels like here's a bunch of new ideas that have nothing to do with each other, and it's just the lack of setup and payoff, and it's the lack of cohesion across all of it.
And I think you have to decide one or the other, right? Again, like this movie is, as you're saying, trying to have it both ways.
Right.
And so I think this movie doesn't have a good, like nothing in this movie sets it up for that's the final, or like that's the first xenomorph. And that's why that is such a weird tag at the end, because like it's played as if, oh my god, they created the first xenomorph. But all of the lore is about the engineers making these, like, all of this black goo. They have a ship filled with thousands of these vials headed to Earth to destroy us because we did something they didn't like, and they've decided to turn us into xenomorph creatures or whatever the hell. And so I think this is where you need to decide, like, what does the creation of the monster mean if this is the creation of the monster? And I feel like then it needs to tie back to some decision, ideally that's related to the theme. So like something goes wrong, it's nobody's fault, Shaw has to make a decision, and in doing that inadvertently, like, you know, she chooses selflessness, but in doing that ironically creates the chain of events that will create the xenomorph or whatever, right? Like tie it to a choice so that it represents something and has like meaning. But that can only happen if you don't also have a story about a race of humans called the engineers that are like white and large, but still have entirely our DNA, that are trying to destroy us because they made us and then like whoopsied, didn't want us anymore, but also died potentially to the thing. Like, is it a story about creation gone too far and it killing the people that tried to become gods? Or is it about, you know, creating this monster? It's got to be either or, and this movie's trying to do both.
Well, one of the key problems, I think we're really close to fixing this, by the way, guys. Do you feel it clicking together? I feel it clicking together.
Yeah. We have a lot of parts. I don't know.
There's a spine.
I don't know if it's all clicking, but yeah, we have a lot of components that are making sense to me.
Well, and here's the thing. One of the biggest problems with it is the opening scene, because the opening scene is bonkos, and it totally confuses what the black goo is, right? At every other instance, the black goo mostly behaves like what we're discussing, where it's like it creates random mutations, which no one ever says. And if that's what it's going to do, just say that's what it does. And you've got some scientists here who could say that. But the problem in the opening scene is that the engineer guy drinks it and it destroys him. It's destructive in nature. It makes him fall to pieces, which he also seems unaware that it's going to do, which is even more
He seems
bonkers.
kind of surprised, or
he
like...
seems very surprised, even though this is what he was there to do.
Which is ostensible, like, but that's not the intention behind it also. So it's also just that scene is executed such that it gives us exactly the wrong information. Like, he's been sent there purposefully to drink it so his DNA can go into the water and create humanity. That's not how that reads at all, as an opening scene.
I think that actor on set that day decided he had a whole backstory where he was tricked.
Well, but so if you just rework, if you really want to have an opening scene, which I'm not convinced you need, I actually would like the idea of never seeing the engineers on screen. Like, you can have them be the people who created this lab and created the xenomorph and all of this stuff. Sure, why not? Maybe we never meet them. Maybe that's not a popular choice.
It's pretty wild to start this movie off with a guy with kind of like a loincloth on. Like he drops the robe. And he's just
swole dude.
He's a swole dude with like a towel wrapped around his waist. It's pretty wild.
This is the one thing Michael's like, hang on, let's pull it up.
It's Jacob Elordi from like the
Frankenstein.
Yes, 100%. But anyway, but let's say you want to have a scene where the engineers come to Earth and we see what they're up to. We also get an introduction to the black goo and what it actually is and what we can expect it to do for the rest of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do that. So have a scene where the engineers come, they land their spaceship, because we do see it in the opening scene where it like flies away and they're like, our work here is done. But so they land it and they put the black goo into the water supply where some very tiny like salamanders and toads or whatever are in the water. They put it in there and we immediately see these things turn into monsters, right? And maybe one of those, so we see that Earth is like an experiment, right? Everything on Earth, they're lab rats. Or there's nothing, there's like single-celled organisms. They put it in the water, they turn into like tadpoles that crawl out on land that become, like frogs and then become like evil-looking reptile things, and then they eat each other.
I mean, dinosaurs were pretty intense.
Right? And all of this happens in the space of a few minutes.
Yep.
And maybe the engineers then are like, oh, fascinating. And they leave and they're like, our work here on Earth is done. We did our experiment. The experiment has been done. Or better yet, it kills one of the engineers. Like whatever they've made kills them. And they're like, oh, now we got to really go. And now life on Earth has been kicked off because the engineers did it. Again, show us what it is that in a way that makes sense to the way that it will behave in the rest of the movie. And then when we see it on that alien planet, and also we see them creating life, we see them doing biological experiments. We, the audience, are prepped for who the engineers are and what their whole thing is by the time we get there. Or if you don't want to show us, leave it a mystery, but just make it consistent, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of my counter proposal is like,
Sure.
I think you could cut the first 10 minutes of this. Like, I don't need to see the engineers on apparently Earth, even though it doesn't really look like Earth to me the first time I
Well, it's
saw
supposed
it.
to be primordial Earth, I would imagine, like pre-life.
Right. But like, if I don't understand that he's on Earth doing this, then I'm missing the
Yeah,
the
does the
intent
movie
of this.
not tell you that it's Earth?
I don't think so.
I don't think it's just
so.
opening
No.
credits.
Yeah.
Right. So like, how do we know
Right,
that?
so what
Right.
the
I
heck?
did not think it was Earth the first time I
Right.
watched it. And
Yeah,
then
same.
we also have, Shaw and Holloway discovering a cave painting that's like also just like another one. They've already discovered a bunch. So like, anyway, I don't think you need all of that. I think you could withhold information. I think the original Alien does this really well of like just like spoon feeding you like, where am I? Like message, we're on a spaceship, people are waking up. Like it sort of slow rolls that and builds that tension. And I think you could do some of that. And so I was thinking also about the locked door idea that you had, Trisha. I think that's a really, like a locked door is a way to gate understanding. And so I think having a moment where the door opens, we get to go in there and we understand via weird flashback or whatever it is, what the actual plan was, what the goo actually does, who the engineers really were, whatever that is that twists our understanding. I think that could be a more exciting payoff of like, we thought the danger was here. Now they've gotten through this door and, Shaw can say, we were wrong. We were so wrong. And it means something because they were wrong. And now we understand the threat, the clear and present danger that's happening. I think something in that configuration rather than trying to put the big white gooey people in the beginning and the black goo that doesn't make sense, like save it for later until I'm like invested in the characters and it could be an escalation point would be what I would want to see.
That's interesting, kind of positioning access to the lab or whatever we're saying this kind of locked door is. You would want for it to have maximum impact is there to be, once again, scientists making hypotheses for the first half of the movie and maybe projecting onto these beings what they think they're trying to do. Like, okay, yeah, like we're going into this, Shaw's going into this thinking of them as kind of benevolent gods. They're in these cave paintings. They made us. They're inviting us home. They want us to come to them. And so she has a story about them that she's projecting onto what they're finding. And, there can be a narrative being built there but then bad things are happening. Black goo is not what they thought it was, whatever. And then it culminates in the reveal behind this locked door of, oh no, they were not kind of benevolent humans that have human values. They were just this really advanced race that's like very alien and don't think like us at all. And they're just aliens doing this alien project to try to create this perfect being, whatever. And they become not the thing that she thought they were. And in fact, it's something that she wishes she didn't know and doesn't want to know. And it's very bad. I think that's the kind of, third break into third act kind of twist you want.
Well, and I think that's where it struck me that it would be really disappointing for Shaw as a character to learn that not only did they not create humans as something special, like they maybe unintentionally created humans, or they just like started life on Earth as kind of like a random test experiment. They really are just lab rats. Right. And they weren't even maybe among thousands of planets that this has been started on, or they're just sort of like a byproduct of something. So it's not even that they're trying to send the xenomorph to Earth because they pointedly dislike humans for some reason and now want to kill them. It's that humans are not special to them. Humans are
not on their radar.
Not even on their radar, a blip. Like, we worship them as gods. They don't care about us. They may not even know we exist. They created us by accident. We are less than nothing to them. What they're about is this quest for immortality, and that's what killed them, which is the reason we are here at the edge of the universe on the same quest that's going to kill us too.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is something about them being kind of human, though, that is interesting and like does feel like the movie really wants the engineers to be us in a way that I think could still plug in thematically. Like if it's humanity's whatever taken to an extreme such that they are no longer, they are soulless. They're humans rendered soulless because of their quest for immortality. Like I think that could work too. Like I think there's
the quest for immortality is a very
this.
Human quest. So
Sure.
I was saying they're a noble and alien, but actually if we're saying that their quest for the xenomorph is a quest for immortality or perfection, that's extremely human.
Yeah.
I also like the idea of never seeing them, though. So I mean, there is a world in which it's both, which is we see some cave painting type things, so some sort of artifacts or whatever that indicate that they were humanoid, but then we never actually see them in full form, right? So we kind of get that mystery, we get that lean forward, ooh, I want to see one, but I don't get to kind of thing. But then we also get, that maybe that's trying to have it both ways. But I think that there's something interesting there.
I like that. And I think even if you wanted the space jockey connection, if this place is abandoned,
Right.
there could even be like suits that were left behind, but not the people who wore them. We never get to actually see the humanoid things that made us, but but they were humanoid. These things have like arms and legs like humans.
The space jockey thing is a strange like reverse engineering of like to explain this. It's so that was armor and it was a human, but it was clearly larger than the normal human. So I guess they're really big, white, bulbous,
rubber face people,
rubber humans. It's pretty wild. Okay, so I'm gonna try to take stock of where we are right now. So we've coalesced around a theme of like investigating what does it mean to have a soul, and that can be expressed with selfless behavior, selfish survival behavior as opposites. We have Elizabeth Shaw as our protagonist, who begins on the selfless side of the spectrum, and we have David, who is our robot secondary protagonist, who can also kind of be an antagonist and do certain things, but is introduced as he is in this movie as like, I do not have a soul. They will have crossing arcs as the events of the plot progress, where Shaw's belief in like selflessness or I will always choose selflessness over my own survival gets worn down, and like the animalistic nature of humanity is revealed throughout this thing when faced with death.
If she's the final girl, like she has to become the evolutionary survivalist.
Right.
She cannot be
Right.
final girl if she stays in that kind of idealistic mode.
And then meanwhile, David can be kind of going on a different journey of learning to be a real boy. Like, what does it mean to be a human? Making certain choices is maybe the way you do it. I like the idea of like, if we have this love interest, he makes a dark choice that totally rattles Shaw's belief in the order of the world and makes her start to doubt things and sends her down a path. We're consolidating the crew. The 17 people are out. We're down to more like 7. There are kind of 8 on the board right now. We don't have to be like super specific, but the goal with that is to be moving us more toward the horror genre setup of a few people that we can get to know, who can have beliefs, who then make choices, and what happens to them then has meaning and says something about the thematic debate inherent in here. We have a discovery part 1, but there's a locked door that will gate further knowledge that happens. We didn't talk about this much, but I liked, Trisha, your point of, there's so many expeditions of like they go and then they come back and then they go. And,
Mhm.
oh no, there's a storm because the movie needs a storm, so they're trapped. Like, I think there could be something simpler there of like certain people like stay on purpose to do like good science and like,
Mhm.
but things go wrong anyway. So I think,
Real quick.
Yeah.
Well, there's also no horror in this movie for the first half.
Right.
And it's like the only like actiony scary thing that happens is the storm, which isn't horror at all. It's survival,
It's
kind
action,
of thing.
yeah.
Right. So it's like we need to get something, whether it's the worm or whatever. We need to get something early that then gives us that the stakes, the urgency, that there is something here and there's something terrifying here. That doesn't mean everything has to start going crazy that early, but we need to have something, which, yeah, if you look at Alien, it's like these things happen in a certain order, and you have to build up that feeling, that tension, even if it's, a cat jump scare. Like, you just need to do something to make me feel like I'm watching a horror movie.
yeah.
And yeah, you may not need the storm or whatever, but I do think the movie is smart in splitting people up and having, like we're saying, if you have the red shirt scientists stay behind, almost set up camp, in the structure, because there's all this stuff to investigate. But then there's, Shaw is more concerned with the, archaeological aspects of it, and they need to go back to the ship to like analyze all these like tablets and writings they found or whatever. So there's a reason to split up, and the people who stay behind are the unlucky ones who are going to start encountering what this place actually is, which is this laboratory, and there's all these experiments that were done here that have created monsters via black goo or whatnot.
Yeah.
And so you can have the horror happen to the red shirts while we kind of protect some of the main characters for that first
Exactly.
half, and then midpoint, everything goes horribly wrong.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you could then have the like two monsters basically. So if there's like the base camp, the people in the the spaceship or whatever, that can be the more literal monster alien starting to form, whatever that is. And then back on the ship, there can be the distrust if David's still being shady, if there's
Mhm.
secrets being happening. Like, each place has its own monster. Because I do think that's another thing that Prometheus is missing. An Alien, it's basically like you're in a building and then you're trapped with an alien, and that's it. Like the arena is clear and the monster can move around this arena in the way you can't, but like the boundaries are set where you just like, there's a monster in the house, what do we do? And everything can play out here. And because of the sort of dual like location situation, there isn't as clean a like, there's a monster in the house and like we definitely can't go outside. We can go out some of the time, but not all the time. Anyway, that would be a thing that we need to clean up, I think.
That is where the storm is useful. Like, I think you could do a version of this where it's like, there's a storm coming in. I want to go back to the ship to analyze all these photographs we took of this writing or whatever. So we're going to go back, but you guys stay here and the storm will pass, in a day. And, we'll keep doing what we want to keep doing. And then on the ship, like you're saying, Michael, there can be one kind of more maybe like psychological horror with David, who has brought back samples with him and is now proceeding with, Wayland's instructions to like see what happens to human beings when this black goo's used on them or whatever. And then back, in the alien area, they are stuck there because of the storm and they don't realize what this place is. And it becomes clear as the longer they're stuck there, the more scary it becomes.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there could be a lot more tension around the like, we know David's got the goo and he wants to use it on somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be like a tenser, like Tarantino-esque sequence almost of like, who's he gonna like we think it's gonna go to this person and then it goes to that person. Right now it's like, it just like breezes by, and like you said, Alex, we kind of don't like Holloway anyway. So it's like, yeah, put the goo in him, see what happens.
But yeah, once again, like seeing David first put the goo into a petri dish and like see it change, a tiny bacteria into something crazy, and then that
or
then
immortal,
he gets the idea. Yeah, it triples its DNA, things that make it seem to signal longer life, and so that's now he wants to use it. But then I think Alien Romulus does this with like the rat, where it's like at first the rat looks like it's super strong and immortal,
Oh,
and
yeah,
then
yeah,
the
yeah.
longer the video feed is on it, it becomes like a monster.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think yeah, there's opportunities there where it's like we can have a clearer cause and effect with David of samples brought back, initial thesis is proving out. Now I want to, Wayland's telling me just use it on a person. I want to find out if it works on a person before you wake me up. And so now he's moving on to that. But we maybe have a dramatic irony moment of seeing what happens to that bacteria. It actually goes crazy eventually and is kind of scary.
Mhm.
And like who he chooses to like give it to could also be a character. Like if he was instructed to give it to, Shaw, but instead he chooses Holloway. Like there could be moments along that arc that are happening that add dimension there. And so I kind of wanted, middle of the movie happens, yada yada yada. I kind of want to get toward like, so what's our ending? Like what are the final choices that we think our characters should be making to be, rendering the kind of final judgments and like expressing the theme, fulfilling the horror needs. Right now, the ending is the stakes become huge for some reason because like they got to save Earth by the end, and like that's I think too big to go here. And there's Charlize Theron has to run to her escape pod, and then she lands, but then she's on the thing, and then the thing's running. Like there's too much in this like third act. But so like in an ideal world, if we had this like smaller crew, we don't need a zombie action scene with like a flying zombie and blowtorches and all this stupid stuff. What do we want for our ending here? What's feeling right? It's sort of like the last scene or two where we're leaving our characters.
I mean, I certainly like the, Shaw going, like, continuing to travel with David, but only because she gets to sort of control him and use him as a tool, and not necessarily in, I don't know, like a fully pessimistic way of like, oh, the only way she can survive is by kind of going full selfish, like giving up her selflessness, as much as just the the synthesizing of her thesis and the antithesis of like she realizes if it is something like what I said of she is really trying to hold on to her faith even as David and people and Holloway and people around her test it. Her synthesis at the end is her saying, no, I can still believe the things I believe, and I can still be an optimist, and I can still be faithful, while also realizing that I have to be selfish sometimes and take advantage of something like David for all of his flaws, and decide to travel with him while also doing it for my own in the interest of my own survival, and not as like a selfless act, essentially.
Leaning more toward like a full growth arc, basically.
A full growth, but in a fun, dark way. Do you know what I mean? Like in a fun way where it's like we're seeing Dark Shaw, but in a way that doesn't feel just pessimistic, like she's just now gone off the deep end or something like that.
I think we're going to get into a personality test here where each of us wants a different ending. Trisha, what are you?
Okay. Here's what I want. I want they get into the innermost part of the lab. They do whatever goes wrong that creates essentially a xenomorph. It doesn't have to look exactly like the xenomorph that we know, but why not? I mean, who cares?
Yeah,
like
make it the xenomorph.
They're trying to create the perfect species. They were this close to doing it, and all they needed was, these dummies to come along and finish up their research and their experiments, and they've made the xenomorph. Whoops, they have unleashed the ultimate horror. Then they realize they have to get out of there. So I like the idea of Wayland, give him more to do, right? He now wants immortality. He brought everybody here because he wanted immortality, and he's now unleashed the ultimate horror, but technically an immortal and perfect being. So I want there to be like almost they're trying to escape sequence, and everyone is maybe like Shaw and the Janik character are going to like escape. They've kind of turned on Wayland, or he's like stuck. They're going to leave him behind, right? Kind of thing. But then Wayland is going to buy his way out. So he promises Janik like a bunch more money, because in our version, Janik is the guy who's there for the money, right? He's the corporate stooge. And so Wayland is like, save my life. I'll pay you, whatever, quadruple whatever, you'll be this person. And they're like, okay, we're going to save you. But then I want Wayland to get impregnated by the xenomorph with the ovipositor right down Wayland's throat. So he becomes the person. He's Wayland. He has to be the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, after The Brutalist, I feel like Guy Pearce is owed
Yikes.
one of those.
Sure. Whew. Brian.
What?
Anyway, so Wayland gets caught by the thing. They leave Wayland. And even David, right, has to kind of make that choice. Or I don't know, maybe David's head has already been ripped off by then. And then something goes terribly awry. The xenomorph also somehow gets Janek, or something bad happens to Janek. He gets impaled by some piece of machinery or something. Shaw cannot fly the ship, right? She is now the only person left. And so she has to go back and get David's head. But it's because she has to be, that's her only ticket off this planet is to use David to fly the ship because he can do it. And then she's very clear in the reason that she's saving David. He's like, oh, all that stuff you said about me having a soul, is that why you've saved me? And she's like, absolutely not. We're surviving. Let's go.
Cool. Alex, what about you?
I'm kind of on board with where Trisha ended there. I think the idea that by the end, Shaw embracing that, like, it's fine to have these ideals and beliefs and hopes for what humanity can be, but when the chips are down and now we're just literally who's going to get off this planet, her having that relationship with if she has a relationship with David that is evolving throughout the course of the movie, and and there's some way that she kind of needs him at the end, that is, she's not going back to save him for the sake of saving him. She needs him as a tool to steer the ship to get her off of this place. And actually maybe her belief that he can have a soul is no longer like his actions, and maybe he has actually tried to reach towards something like being more of a self, being more of a human-like being. But I think it'd be interesting if it was kind of more tragic, of like, he doesn't succeed. He is still truly something different than a human being. And she kind of sees that by the end, and it's part of her kind of disillusionment arc. I am seeing her more having a disillusionment arc. So it's like she had all these kind of optimistic hopes for her creators, for the engineers, for AI, like for robots, like they can be more than, she doesn't like how they treat David. Like, we should treat them like equals. And then by the end, the events of this movie have soured her on hopes of these aliens, these creators, the engineers having human-like benevolence. She's soured on the idea that AI can kind of be our better selves, and she is more just like, I need to save my ass and get off this planet, and I'm going to use you to help me do that. And so I do like a little bit of a darker, not a synthesis, but actually more of what you have on that screen, Michael, of the arrow has gone all the way across, and she is now free of her illusions.
She's got to leave that cross necklace behind. God damn it. Leave it.
Yeah. I think she has to lose the cross in part of, and as she's trying to survive, Yep.
Yeah.
And I think she can still believe, some things are worth saving. She believes she's worth saving. She believes that, there are still good humans, but she has no more illusions that there's kind of like a force of good that wins out in the end.
Right.
Like, no, I have to save myself. There is no force of good that will save me.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I'm fine with the disillusionment arc. I'm not fine with the corruption arc. So it feels like we're on the same page there. It's like, I don't want someone who is just like, I want to still be rooting for her at the end.
Oh, Michael wants the corruption arc.
Yeah, we'll let Michael talk in a second. But I want someone I'm still rooting for at the end. I want to see her in the next movie as my character I'm rooting for. I think that's where I'm like not willing to go like full dark, even though I often am willing to go that way. And I want the xenomorph to be the xenomorph God damn it. Like that's
Mhm.
the other thing is, we'll talk about characters and stuff like that, but I just want this movie to actually be a prequel to Alien. It doesn't have to be the lead up prequel. It can leave room for a Covenant type movie or a trilogy or whatever. I just wanted to feel like we saw the birth of the first xenomorph. That was the point of this movie at all.
Mhm.
That's definitely something that I want.
Mhm.
Mike?
And really quick, it would be nice if it was just literally the planet. It would be nice if it was
Yep.
if it was the planet from the first Alien, and this is the ship. I don't know. It could be interesting if you could find a way to. It was just so
Do
weird
both,
watching.
yeah.
Think about the trailer
Yeah.
and the fact that it is the exact same kind of ship. It has the exact same jockey, captain's chair, all those things, and yet it's not the same ship. It's the ship is not going to that planet at the end.
Right.
It's just very strange that it has all these direct prequel links, and yet none of them actually pay off as leading to that.
Especially because in early drafts where it was more of a direct prequel, those things just got kept in.
Right,
Like
right.
that's why it feels like it's trying to do everything, because it literally is trying to do everything. They didn't make a new movie; they just kept all the stuff and wrote things around it.
Yeah, but I am with Brian. I think in that I like a disillusionment arc where we're rooting for her, and we're like, yeah, you go, girl. Like, screw all these people. You survive. Use whatever you got to do to survive at the end. But she's not the person she was at the beginning. She's not that
Right.
kind of hopeful, optimistic person. She's a realist in the most like realist way.
Yep.
Michael.
Yeah, I don't need this to be the creation of the xenomorph personally. Like, I think it would have been a cleaner, better movie if they'd gone that way. But I feel like so much needs to change about it to make that make that true, that it feels like it's a different movie. And I think it could work as if you don't make such a big deal of it by making it the last shot, but like it's a thing that happens, earlier in the third act. I like, Trisha, your idea of the Wayland gets immortality by becoming a xenomorph.
This is what I'm saying.
This is what you wanted. Yeah, here you go. I think that would be a cool decision to give to Shaw.
He creates life. He gets impregnated by a xenomorph and creates new life.
Congrats, Wayland, you did it.
Right.
He never did that before.
And I think giving that as a dark choice to Shaw, to survive, contrive a situation where to get out of his, I don't know,
She
capture
sticks
or
a
whatever.
face hugger on him.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. She does that. He gets what he wants. The dark irony there. But them as these advanced humans, engineers went too far and created an entire species of soulless things. The xenomorph is one of them that, it's gone on to now spread throughout the galaxy. I think that's cool and can work. You just need to not do the prequel things that you're talking about, Brian, of tipping your hat and be like,
Right.
And yeah, I think I'm on board with basically all of the disillusionment Shaw stuff. I just don't want her to get away. I think she should make a dark final choice that's no, I need to survive. I'm making this choice, and then immediately is killed or is punished by it, by taking the selfless act. So by the end, humanity is gone. There's no more humans, and what we have as output are a soulless race created by humans, and David, who has come to represent the soul, the selfless side of humans. And humans have created both of these new species that are extreme polar opposites. It's kind of like the end of AI a little bit. Haley Joel Osment.
Our favorite film.
Yeah. Anyway,
I was thinking reverse Ex Machina, where she tricks David into essentially becoming the tool that she needs to survive.
Yeah. I think it's I don't know. Yeah. I like the darkness of she does make that choice and then gets punished for it, because that's the point, is all these people that have taken these extreme measures ended up, destroying their humanity metaphorically and literally. So
yeah, that's cool.
I can take. It's a dark horror movie ending for sure.
Yeah.
We picked a lane for genre.
Yes.
Yeah. The one it should have been.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think in either version, either one where she gets off or doesn't, I do think it's not the happy Ripley ending of like I made it, I'm safe, I have my cat, I can go to my. I think either way, something has been taken from her that she can never get back. Like she
100%.
is now kind of a broken person from the experience, and she counted on a belief system and a way of seeing the world that is shattered forever. And now she's kind of, if she is still alive and she does get off, there's kind of an open question of like, what do you do with that? What do you do now that like all the things that you kind of hoped and wanted to be true about life and the universe and about humanity maybe were just wrong. So I think, either way, I think they could be equally dark in different ways.
Yeah. All right. Well, have we fixed Prometheus?
Oh, wait, one last idea.
Yeah.
If we want to launch the alien spaceship, right? Because we have that spaceship area, and if we want to keep
there are multiple spaceships there. One crashes, she takes off in another one.
Why doesn't she launch the spaceship that has the xenomorph on it to the engineers' homeworld to go wipe all of them out? She could find out. So, like now in the movie,
right?
But she's going to like.
Right. But in my version, she doesn't go anywhere. She's dying, and she's like, "Screw all of you guys! I'm sending you a present. It's the xenomorph that you created, and it's going to their homeworld to wipe all of them out." So she, does a genocide at the end. If you want the really dark choice,
the darker choice is
we're going even darker than that.
Is that she has to choose between, do I let myself die or do I launch the ship that's going to kill all of the humans at Earth? And she chooses to launch the ship. So,
that's really go a little.
I'm just saying
that's really extreme. No, but I mean, there's possibilities with what Trisha just said there. I mean, like that could conceivably be the ship that crashes on what's the name of the planet in the first movie. If you want to do the direct, the direct prequel thing, she can set it on a course.
She sends it on its course to go there.
Yeah, and she could. But I like the idea. I like that idea of screw you guys. Like her belief system is so totally inverted. She began the movie as like hopeful and excited about meeting her creators, and now she's like, actually, I think you should all die because your unholy project, your galactic project to make this perfect species, like I like screw you, like die.
Yep.
And maybe even seeing if we want to go dark with the humanity thing, Michael, seeing that like, yeah, we are the engineers. The engineers are just us in the future. The engineers are Wayland. Like Wayland is like a proto-engineer. He's trying to like get to the same thing. So die. Like let it be done.
But is that like what lesson has she learned then? Like, is that a survival thing that like I must kill in order to like survive as humanity?
Maybe if it's like if I'm now selfish.
Oh, it's more of that humanity is not worth saving. Like humanity is already like basically the soulless thing that Holloway always said it was. That they always said.
Right, so it depends on which planet you're sending it to. If you're saying it's to Earth, you're saying like screw humans. You're sending it to their planet. You're saying screw engineers. Yeah. Anyway, lots of possibilities. I think we're all circling around the same darkness, but there's lots of fun options there. I do love her though, sending a ship off for a reason, and that could be our direct prequel explanation.
This does. There is something interesting here about when you hear a movie where there was one ending, and then they shot like two endings, and then they decided on a different one, and you're like, how on earth could those two endings have been both in consideration with the same lead up, And generally speaking, that's not what you want. You want to know exactly what you're going up to, and you want the entire movie to build towards that. But there is something interesting about constructing the first 90% of a character arc such that the last 10% can feel like a correct payoff to the first 90%, but with a different sort of message attached to it, with a different sort of like thematic point that the writer is making. So this does feel like an interesting experiment to that of, we're not changing the lead up, we're just changing the final choice, and in a way that hopefully feels like it is the correct ending, whichever one you choose, almost, if that makes sense. Like correct in the sense that it feels correctly set up and paid off.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I feel like there is, crisis, dark moment, you learn your lesson, and then it's like, okay, now go prove it, and then you're tested again. And this is kind of like the spin you're putting on the ball at the end of that. So like she still learned that lesson.
Right.
And then the spin that we're putting on it can like flavor it or underscore certain parts of it, which is interesting. Yeah. So again, like there's a lot of stuff in Prometheus that is really interesting, and I do enjoy watching it in between the parts that I'm angry at it and frustrated. And I think it's clear that this isn't a movie that didn't have ideas or didn't want to be about things or wasn't like reaching for cool stuff. I think it's that it was reaching for too many things all at once. This has been like a way to kind of strip it down, hone it, focus it on certain things. But I feel like if we'd gone with a different thematic, Brian, your point about like creation and destruction, that duality, like you could focus more on that and maybe different character choices would arise from there. The faith versus science thing sort of morphed into Soul, but you could be more explicit about that and go full contact Jodie Foster, like the best movie about faith versus science ever made. Anyway, so this was, to me, a really fun exercise, and I think Prometheus for existing, for letting us, giving this material to us to play around with. I'm a little sad. I feel like we could have figured out the Idris Elba, and I feel like Idris Elba and Charlize Theron could be the same person.
I mean, the movie does
in
shove
real
them
life?
together a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. There's like something about the, I don't know.
I mean, yeah, because I do like I like Charlize Theron being, corporate ice queen. Like that's always fun. So I don't want to lose that necessarily. But yeah, she needs more of a clear role in this movie besides just being there and being Waylon's daughter.
Yeah.
We'll fix it next time. We'll fix that part next time.
Yeah, we'll get to that next time. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone for going on this journey. This has been us fixing Prometheus, and we will see you in the next episode.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.